Hello, and welcome back to another video. Today we're moving up from PS1 to a PS2. I'll be doing an overview of the system and break it down from a beginner's perspective on how easy it is to disassemble and other things along those lines. I also want to make this video as I have an 18,000 model, which was only released in Japan due to it being an earlier model before the PS2 was released in the US. I had trouble finding disassembly guides for this specific unit, so I hope this helps out other people as well. Alright, so first off, we're gonna disassemble this. There are 4 rubber feet alongside 6 plastic covers, hiding all the screws. The plastic ones are a bit tougher to get since they lay flush, but they aren't too hard with a pry tool. Here we'll use a Phillips size 2-bit. Remember to take note where these 2 screws here belong, as they are longer than the others. We'll go ahead and flip this over. Now we'll have to decide how we want to remove the warranty sticker. You can do it a few different ways, but I have a hot air station, so I'm just going to blast it with a bit of heat at the lowest temperature. Mine is 90 degrees Celsius, which is quite a bit hotter than what is typically used, like a hairdryer, so we'll be careful not to leave it on too long. With that done, I use a pair of tweezers to get underneath it without trying to damage it, since I'd like to put it back afterwards. Though you could just cut through it if you don't care. Now that there's a decent enough tab to pull on, it's good enough for me to just pull with my fingers. And as an added bonus, we'll get this really satisfying peel. Nice. With the sticker gone, we can separate the top of the PS2. Make sure to be careful as there is a cable connecting the two. In the lid there is a housing for the power and disk drive buttons. You can just pry it up a bit and it will pop up. Here we disconnect the power switch and remove the screw holding the controller port, though you can wait on that as it's a bit easier to remove its cable with it still in. On the back here, we push this in to get the PC card out, which isn't seen in the later rendition, as it's unique to the 10 through 18,000 models before the expansion bay was added. Now we can just lift off the bottom shell and give it a quick look. All seems good to me. This is the other end of the button cable. We can disconnect it and set it aside for now. Down over here is the connector to the controller port and memory card slots. As I said earlier, it would have been easier to leave the screw in to do this, as now I kind of have to do it upside down, but I just have to hold it in place while flipping the gate, which allows me to pull it out. We see this ribbon cable here to the disk drive, but before we can get to that, we have to remove this metal shield. So we quickly go ahead and remove these screws and it just comes right off, and we can set that aside. Now similarly to the controller port, we can flip this gate to release the disk drive as well. Next is the cable which is connected to the fan. It's quite the pain to get out due to there not being any tabs to hold onto it. I try to wiggle it out here with my fingers, but to no avail, so we'll just ignore it for now. We'll go ahead and take the disk drive out here. There are 2 screws holding it to the housing, so we take this one on the right out and the other one on the left side. With those gone, it can just be lifted up like so. Next we move on to the cable for the power button and pull it through this hole in the plastic. We can just lift the power switch out, there's nothing holding it down. Moving on to the power supply, there is another mistake I made when taking apart these 4 screws here. I found it easier to take the main board off first, so I end up putting one of the screws back, as you can see coming up here, just to hold it in place for the time being. Now on the back side of the board, I try to disconnect the fan ribbon cable. I used a pair of tweezers to rock it back and forth with the wires, and I would not recommend this, as there is a pretty decent chance of ripping them out. Luckily here, there wasn't any accidents. But now moving forward, we can take these 2 screws out for the board and the middle housing, one on the left and one on the right from this angle. Now we'll move on to a Phillips 0-bit for these smaller screws. We have the first screw up here, followed by this one in the middle, and one to the right of it. And then we have this screw here, which unfortunately snapped in half. I was having a tough time getting it out, and now we can see why. But we'll get to that in a bit. For now, we'll be able to lift out the board and back shield from the middle housing, setting that aside to focus on the board itself. We can see the remainder of the broken screw there, sadly. Oh, and I also forgot this screw here, so we'll just take this off now. Now that all the screws are out, we can separate it from the shield and take a look at this conundrum with the broken piece. Here I tried to use some pliers to unscrew it from the hole, but I didn't have any luck after going at it for a few minutes, so sadly this is just going to have to stay like this for now. But looking at the rest of the shield, we see the thermal pads and some interesting bits jutting out. Here is the back side of the board. Everything seems to be in order. I don't see any obvious blown capacitors or bad components. It looks pretty okay from my rookie perspective. But with that in order, we can go ahead and put the shield back on, give it a nice firm push or two to get the pads situated nicely, and send it on its way. Going back to the middle housing and the power supply, we can take out that final screw, and now that it's disconnected from the main board, it comes out nice and easy. I tried taking it out earlier and struggled quite a bit, so I found this way to be much easier. Going to the fan, we can unscrew it here with just this one screw holding it in place. It could have been taken out earlier after removing the disk drive, but I waited until now and it doesn't matter either way. The shell does have one more piece to take off if you want to do a full cleaning, regarding the lid. Removing this screw here will release the bracket holding the slot covers for the controller port in place. You can just pop them out from the bottom afterwards, but be careful not to lose the little springs attached to them. I gave everything a quick cleaning, but wanted to focus on the assembly itself, so we'll just skip right past that for now. So we'll just get right back into it with putting the covers back in. I'll zoom in here to try to give a better perspective, but the angle is a bit tough to make out. There's a raised bump on the cover that one end of the spring goes around. The middle spring will also go around a similar peg, and finally the end sits in a gap between the plastic. With those set in place, you can put the bracket on and screw it down, giving you a good chance to see if the springs work properly, which in my case they do. Moving on to the final piece of disassembly, we have the disk drive. Still using the Phillips 0-bit, we have 4 screws to take out, 2 on top and 2 on the sides in the middle. Get this top piece off, you have to get a good angle on it and just pull up. On the underside, there you can see some dirt built up, which I cleaned up quickly and then did the same thing to the disk drive as you can see. To get the tray out, there are 2 more screws holding the rail in place on the bottom left. There are little pegs holding it in place, so you have to lift up the left side and slide it back to get it off. Getting a look at the underside, it looks good to me. Now, I wanted to show this part since it's important. It's always good to give the laser a gentle clean with a Q-tip and a bit of isopropyl alcohol to get any dirt or dust out. It's important to be careful and not give too much pressure since the component is pretty sensitive. While I'm in here, I gave the spindle a quick scrub as well before setting the tray back down. Once again, you have to hold it at a bit of an angle with the left side raised slightly till you can set the holes back into their nubs like so. With those in place, we can put the 2 screws back in. Let me go ahead and show the bottom of the disk drive as well. I checked everything off camera and it looks to be in order. Flipping it back over one last time, we can put the top cover back on with those 4 screws back in place. Jumping back over to the board, we can give it a good press to make sure the pads are nice and set in. With that being the case, we can put the screws back in, connecting the board and shield once more, minus the broken screw of course. Also, after going through this, I would recommend putting the fan and disk drive in before so you can better manage the cables, but this way works as well. Back into it, we can put the board back into the housing, making sure it aligns properly with the pegs as you can see in the top left, and then the 3 screws will hold it in place. Now we'll get to my next mistake as we flip it over and put the disk drive in. To properly do it, you have to set the fan in its section first, otherwise it'll stick out. I felt it was good to leave this in to show the order of operations and how easy it is to mix it up, but hopefully this will help save someone a bit of time, but it wasn't too big of a deal either way. For now, I'll just keep going as if I did it correctly. We put the 2 screws in there and then flip it over so we can attach the cable to the board. I'll do a bit better explanation in a bit here. In the middle of all that, however, we can put the controller board back in. You just have to make sure the cable is through the opening and line it up with the gate. I chose to do it upside down, but you could do it the other way around and probably find it a bit easier. Going back up top, we can screw it into place. Here is where I realized my mistake and undo all the screws once more and then flip it back over to open the gate up. A lot of flip-flopping going on here. But with the disk drive being able to be lifted up, I can slide the fan in its place. You should also put the power cable in at this point too, but I realized that in a bit here. Going back to the underside, you can see the cable is a bit stuck underneath the board, but a pair of tweezers can get it out easy enough with some wiggling. And finally connecting it for the final time. Next we have to squeeze the fan connector through. There is enough room so I managed okay, but putting it in earlier would have made less work for myself. You thought I was done with the mistakes, but I have one last cherry on top with the power button cable here. Getting it into position, you see it needs to go through the hole here. Luckily I don't need to disconnect the disk drive cable, and with the screws off you can lift it up and slide the cable through. Hopefully less sloppy than I did. Moving it out of the way, we can connect the cable with a bit of a push. We got there in the end. So now we can go back and put the bottom metal shield in with its 4 screws like so. Finally, it's time for the bottom case to go on. Just set it in at a bit of an angle like this, and it fits nicely. Going back to the top side, we'll get it into a better position to set the power supply back in. You'll have to give it a bit of pressure for the pins there to go through the white connector you see on the top left. Once it's nice and flush though, we can put the 4 screws to hold it in, as well as the power switch afterwards. You can just slide it in like so, then connect the cable to the board. One final screw on the inside to hold the fan down, and we can move to the top of the shell. Grabbing the power cable, we can tuck it between these pegs here to help keep it in place. Now grabbing the buttons themselves, you align it with the 2 holes on the bottom there and shimmy it into position. It's a bit hard to know when you fully get it in, but once you do it'll stay pretty solidly. There is a little bit of tape there from the factory that has long since lost its stickiness, but to put the top on, similarly to the bottom shell, you have to do it at a bit of an angle by leaning the front down. As you see here, the disc tray is able to slot in, and you can rest the back down into place. Giving it one final flip, we can get it into place to put the outer screws in. Remember, the two longer screws go to these two holes right here, but I'll zoom through me screwing all these in and turn it around to get these last four like so. Now finally the screw covers go back in. The rubber ones in particular will go back on these four slots here, and the plastic ones will cover all the remaining ones. And with only a few mistakes along the way, we have it. A full dis and reassembly of an 18,000 model PS2. From a beginner's perspective, the teardown wasn't too complex. There are definitely easier ways of doing things, but as long as you're careful with the cables, it's not too hard. The order of operations can definitely add more work if you do them incorrectly, but didn't lead to any harm in the long run. Overall, I'll give it a 4 out of 10 for difficulty. Let me know if you agree, and for now, that's all for me, so goodbye folks.